Hello once again, everybody at home. It's your friendly neighborhood AP World teacher, Mr. McDowell, back with another lesson via the magic of the internet. This will actually be our last one for our Snow Day Palooza, if only because I want to give folks who may have lost power or who may have had other things to do and needed to get caught up with other classes. I want to give them an opportunity to be able to view these videos so they can be prepped up for the quiz that we'll have on Friday when we're back, which we should be. Hint, hint, by the way. Anyhow, today's lesson is something that the vast majority of you are probably familiar with. You've probably heard of the Columbian Exchange, either in American 1 or in APUSH, or both if you took both of those courses. This one's just going to get a little bit deeper. We're going to dive in a bit further. And you're going to want to pay attention not only to the straight up note stuff, but you are also going to want to pay attention to some of the things I have to say because they'd make great supplemental facts. The reason for that is the Columbian Exchange was actually one of the prompts on last year's AP World Test, and while you're probably not going to see something like that again on the AP final itself, it does give me a ready-made LEQ prompt that I can throw at you whenever I want to. Hint, hint. All right, so we're diving straight into the waters of vocabulary right away. The Columbian Exchange itself is defined by this first bullet. It is the transfer of people, diseases, plants, and animals between the Americas and Afro-Eurasia. That is the definition of the Columbian Exchange. Now, please note that you have to use the word between there. And the reason you have to use the word between there is because, well, it was not a one-way street. You can see that a lot of stuff went from both sides of the Atlantic, and the rest of this presentation is all about looking at what went where. We'll do a deeper dive on a few of these goods, but this is just kind of giving you a really big picture, and it is an important one. Just so you know, this is, again, one of those big three turning points of history because it creates the first truly global trade network, and you need to include that somewhere because global is the word that we're looking at. This is, after all, AP world history. Next slide's a map that should give you an idea of the scale of this thing. All right, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. If you're at a place where you can just pause the video and look at this, what I would recommend doing is do so and then create like a little T-chart or something and tell yourself what went from one side of the Atlantic to the other and vice versa. If you get confused or if there's a trade good on there that you're curious about, shoot me a message and I will gladly answer it, provided that it's relevant. Okay, so first let's look at the effects of the Columbian Exchange in the Americas. Why were these crops brought over? Well, for the most part, the non-cash crops were brought over because the European colonists, whether they were Spanish, Portuguese, French, British, Dutch, Swedish, Danish, all of those guys did establish colonies over here. Those crops enabled Europeans to eat a diet that they were accustomed to. They didn't have to shift gears. Sugar, as we will see, became a critical crop in most of the major colonies in the Americas. We've grown up, I include myself with that, with a very Amerocentric viewpoint, that is to say, centric on the United States of America. You need to delete that. The most important colonies for most of the colonial period from the 1500s to the late 1700s were actually located to our south. The most profitable ones were almost universally either producing precious metals in the case of Peru or producing sugar in the case of the Caribbean and Brazil. You do also see new animals being brought over, Afro-Eurasian animals, pigs, horses, sheep, and cattle. They come over where, in the absence of things to kill and eat them, other than people, they flourish in large, large numbers. Heck, we still have a wild hog problem in North Carolina right now. The other major effect in the Americas is, of course, demographic. These animals did get out or get captured when Native Americans fought back, and horses being introduced to the Americas really did transition Native Americans' way of life. That classic image that is oftentimes an unfortunate racial stereotype of an Indian riding the Great Plains across in search of buffalo with his horse. Well, that didn't exist until at least the 1500s, but once it did, a lot of settled peoples, especially in the western parts of Mexico, the United States, and Canada, did become horse nomads. You can see that in this image here. We have a lady pulling a carrier that appears to have two children in it without wheels. That's not going to be a comfy ride, but it does mean that you can go from point A to point B a lot faster than the speed of a toddler. With that said, of course, the most notable effect of the Columbian Exchange in the Americas is still disease, which obliterates natives oftentimes a long time before they encountered Europeans. Go-to example there is, of course, the Inca, who fought a civil war after one of their emperors died of smallpox several years before the arrival of Europeans into Peru. So, what about elsewhere? We're actually almost done, by the way. American crops actually produced a major increase in global caloric intake. And the result of that is a population explosion all around the globe. The crops in question, you have potatoes and corn, as well as in Africa, cassava, which is a plant that you're probably most familiar with if you're familiar with it at all, less as cassava root, which you can eat, but also as tapioca. Anyway, a well-known example of this is, of course, Ireland, who had that huge population boost thanks to the farming of potatoes, and of course the famous potato famine when the amount of potatoes went down thanks to a fungus that was also from the Americas. China's another good example. The Chinese population spikes, and corn and peanuts and sweet potatoes are definitely supplemental to the Chinese diet. And you can even see right over here in our graph, this is 1400 to 2000 in terms of the human population. And you see how massive the population has grown since the arrival of Europeans in the Americas. Compare that to the previous 1400 years. That is an amazing population increase, and a lot of it is due to American crops. You also see American crops become luxuries. You see American luxury crops such as chocolate, once it's been mixed in with sugar, because without sugar it's terrible, as well as tobacco. And both of those become popular in Europe as well as China. And I included this image here because it's this massive pipe being smoked by Sir Walter Raleigh. And there's a joke in there about juuling, but I am above that joke. I'm not going to make that joke. American silver was also used to purchase Chinese tea and silk and porcelain. So silver mined in Peru, and we are going to do a whole lesson on silver. Silver mined in Peru would be used to buy tea in China. That's a global trade network because that tea would then, of course, be consumed in, say, Spain or England or any number of other European nations. So what are the downsides? Because this wouldn't be a history lesson if I left you not bummed out. Well, first of all, the less important one, mass importation of new precious metals created inflation throughout the globe, especially in Europe, but really all over. And much more importantly than that, the huge number of Native Americans who died, which we will take another look at that a couple of different angles, as well as a papal ban on enslaving Catholics and later all Christians, meant that Europeans began to use African slaves as labor in mines and on plantations. We will talk about a deeper look at the rationale behind that. I'm not glossing it over, but like I said back at the beginning, this is more of just a taster tour. We're going to do deep dive looks at four specific trade goods: sugar, silver, slaves, which aren't really a trade good since they're human beings, and fur. We're going to spend whole days on those, and they're going to be fascinating and really depressing lessons, but for right now, just know that the Columbian Exchange's downside was pretty much single-handedly creating the concept of race-based slavery in the Western Hemisphere. Okay, the last one. The Columbian Exchange's benefits flowed I don't want to say exclusively, but very, very heavily to European nations because they were the colonizers. It's not too big of an overstatement to say that without the wealth of the Americas, Europe almost certainly does not come to dominate the globe the way that they would from roughly 1600 to roughly 1950. The wealth that was gained from the Americas fueled the European economic and industrial and military engines that would take over large swaths of the world. European dominance is fueled by the New World, and a large portion of the rest of the globe is going to suffer because of it. That's just a simple statement of fact. Thank you guys so much for tuning in once again today, though it's not really voluntary, so I don't know why I said tuning in as though this would have been your first choice. Once again, we will have a quiz on these materials when we get back, which should be Friday. If you are curious as to any of the stuff that I've gone over, please, please, please do not hesitate to send me a message, and I will see you shortly. Enjoy your final day off for at least like a week. Bye.